We are going to kick things off with our in-depth recap of the episode, and we like to cut that out, host it separately on YouTube for your viewing convenience. So if you find yourself just on that recap video and you want to hear Blake's and I's full discussion, it'll be linked down in the description box below. But without further ado, let's get into it. Again, episode 94, Where the Red Fern Glows.
Nice.
So, yeah, nice ref. So the episode picks up with Bell's Hells having just reunited with Dorian Storm and having some drinks, kind of catching up a little bit, but ultimately preparing for the night's rest. So as everyone's getting ready to go to sleep, Ashton actually leaves the tent and Fern goes out after him. And she asks if they're okay, and Ashton says no. And Ashton then says, I've been meaning to do this for forever, but there's never been the right time. And, there probably never is going to be the right time. But he asks if Fern would like any company tonight. And she says she would, but, just to have company, just to cuddle. And Ashton is like, yeah, that's exactly what I need and want as well. So they have their little moment. Everyone comes back inside the tent and basically lays down for their night's rest. However, at some point during the night, Fern awakens to this small creature crawling on her, which is this gray sugar glider. And it's kind of crawling on her and then jumps off of her shoulder and starts like walking away on the ground. And so she's like, what's up with this? So she gets up and decides to follow it. And she's trying to be stealthy because this is the middle of the night. Everyone's sleeping. But Orem does take notice of this due to his insane perception. Fern's like, I'm just going for a walk. And so he's like, okay. And so she leaves the tent following this sugar glider. But Orem does actually get up and follow her as well. And Fern follows this thing all the way to the edge of this encampment that they're in. And it kind of crawls through a little hole to the outside. And so Fern wild shapes and into a bird and follows on right after him. Orem also reaches the wall, sees all of that happen, and decides he's going to keep a distance to kind of just, let her do her thing, but be around in case anything happens. So I think he parkours over the wall and continues after them. So Fern continues to follow the sugar glider south, and it eventually stops and looks to be kind of just in stasis in midair, kind of unnaturally. But then we see that Lord Zuda was actually cloaked and invisible, and the sugar glider was standing on him. And Zuda reveals himself, and he says, it's going to be hard to talk to you in that form because she is still wild shape. So Fern kind of bamps back into her normal self, and he's like, I can tell Odahan has fallen because I can smell her all over you. And he's impressed that they have taken down Odahan. And he also says that he can sense this dark flame within her as well. And that he's just proud of her. And he wishes he had been more patient and kind of waiting for her to come into her own. That he knew her lineage was worthy of being a powerful Ruida's-born and not like that farm girl, referring to Imogen. He basically wants Fern to be the one to be Predathos' vessel. He's like, you should be the one to walk through the cage and awaken him. He apologizes again for being an absent father, basically, but wants to set it right. Basically, this is all stemming from the fact that, he's impressed she's coming into her own. This isn't like, I was a bad dad or anything like that. And
Yeah.
Fern is...
He's still super evil. Let's just be clear.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Just to get that clear. But so Fern basically responds to all this saying that I don't need anything from you. And, did you even actually love my mother? And he basically says she did her part. So no. He wants Fern to come with him, but she doesn't want to because she has her own people here now. And she's like, are you in league with Ludinus? And Zuda says he was, but times are changing and he can kind of make a play for power now. So he says, just come with me and I can show you the path to unlocking your true potential. And Fern does admittedly like the sound of that, unlocking her potential, becoming more powerful. But she's like, I'm not going to come with you though, because again, I have a family now. And he's like, I don't have time for this. So maybe it's better for you to face your demons. And Zuda pulls out this mirror. It's this dark mirror, and he turns it around and shows it to Fern. And inside, she sees this dark version of herself, the same one that was teased all the way back in EXU. and this mirror shatters, and this dark fern like crawls out of it. And Zathuda just laughs as he like goes invisible and vanishes. So Fern's like, "What do you want?" to the dark fern, and she's like, "What everyone from my realm wants, to take your place." And Orm, meanwhile, is watching all of this, and so he sends a message to Dorian to try to wake him up, and is like, "Hey, we need help. Get everybody here." And so Dorian wakes up back in the tent, wakes everybody else up, and then they realize, well, wait, he didn't tell me where they were. Like, I just know that they need help. And so Chetney is on the case with his wolf nose, trying to track down the scent, and he does find a trail. So that whole crew gets out of the tent and is following it to basically that hole in the wall that Fern and the sugar glider went through earlier. So then we cut back to Fern and Orem, who are basically rolling initiative, like combat is starting. Which, as always, gonna kind of just hit the highlights of this combat here. Fern starts everything off by casting Earthbind, and then we have Orem. Basically, he was close enough to basically just immediately run in and be there with her. And Dark Fern is just going straight at it. She thinks Fern has completely like wasted her gifts and wasted her life, and she wants to take her place. And one of the first things she does is create like several like shadow clones of herself. So there's like multiple Dark Ferns, and they surround Orem and Fern, and basically all of them can attack. So there's basically just rounds of attacks happening. But Fern does use her Shard of Raushan once again to turn into her elemental form. But if you'll recall, she already had 2 levels of exhaustion from the previous time she did that, and she didn't get a night's rest. So she will have 4 here in a second. But combat's continuing. At one point, one of the Dark Ferns like slashes Real Fern's neck, and she fails a save and can no longer speak, which means she can't cast spells for the most part. So on her very next turn, she deactivates the shard in order to just do this AoE burst damage, which that destroys 2 of the Shadow Ferns completely and hurts all of the rest. But again, like I mentioned, Fern takes 2 more points of exhaustion when she does this, which I think puts her at 4 and puts her at like can only move half speed and has disadvantage on everything.
I think she has even maybe half health too. I can't remember. It's not
that
good.
sounds yeah,
Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So combat continues, and then we have 2 of these Dark Ferns throw, I think they were called Void Darts at Fern, and one misses, but the one that hits her knocks her out unconscious. And by the nature of how this Void Dart works, it actually like follows up with like another attack. So it basically knocks her out and instantly costs her 2 death saves. But Orem immediately jumps over, gives her a potion, and Fern is back up, and she also has her voice back now. So on her turn, she casts a spell, Scorching Ray, and actually gets the "How do you want to do this?" on the main Dark Fern. And then once the main one's down, the shadow one like dissipated. So they were successful, and as they're just like catching their breath and being like, "What the heck?" they just hear, classic golf clap from Zathuda as he drops his invisibility once more, but this time he's like mounted on Gloamgut, the big Fey dragon. And he's like, "See, I knew you were capable of greatness. Why do you want to surround yourself with these lesser beings?" And she says, "Again, I love them. They're the ones I care about. I'm not going with you. Like, you seem miserable." And Zathuda says, "Very well. I know what's important to you now, so I can prepare my next lesson. I will help you reach your true self because I know you, my child." And he says that lewdness doesn't matter, neither does the Unseelie Court. Zathuda the Black will become the God Eater, and I will be watching you closely from now on. And so then he flies away on Gloamgut, which causes enough ruckus that everyone back in the encampment like wakes up, starts shooting like ballista bolts at him that are landing like near Orem and Fern. So they're like, "We got to get the heck out of here." So they rush back toward the camp and basically run in to the rest of Bell's Hells who had been making their way towards them. And they quickly kind of catch up with what happened to them. And, Fern tells them that her dad like thinks she has potential and wants her to be the vessel, yada, yada, yada. Dorian throws some healing at Fern because she was looking real rough. And Fern is ultimately like, but yeah, I don't think he's working with Ludinus anymore. He seems to have his own plans. So again, they fill each other in and go back and decide to like finish the rest for the night. And that's where we go to break on the first half.
Yeah, so great job. In the second half, Fern does grab shards of the mirror that had summoned Dark Fern. As we'll mention, they finish their rest. The next day, they go to like the war tent where Keyleth is present along with Mythtaker Key and the Dragonborn paladin Topher. And they're immediately concerned about the appearance of the Sorrow Lord the night before, to which Fern's like, hey, oh yeah, I think I know why he was here. That's my dad. And they're like, what? And part of the theme of this conversation is the line, it's a recent discovery. Like we just figured, you know, something we just found out, we want to let you guys know. So they also give them the heads up on this phrasing of the vessel that Ludinus seems keen to have Liliana become. And basically what they get is sort of like this state of Exandria from Keyleth that is basically like, hey, we want to make this sort of final assault on Ruidus. I need to gather some champions. I need to gather some allies. I need to maybe convince certain people to come out of retirement to help with this like final assault. But it's difficult because everyone is burdened by all the things that are happening in Exandria. We know when the Apogee Solstice happened that a lot of different magical enchantments were dispelled. And she mentions that in addition to those enchantments being dispelled, there's protesting all over the world. There's riots. There's demigods who have risen up and sort of used Ludinus's brand, for lack of a better phrase, to seize power. In addition to all of these dark magics and forgotten evils that are basically ransacking the countryside. But she says, hey, despite all of that, let's see who I can pull together and bring together for one last hurrah. They also pull out of the portable hole the piece of machinery that they took from the lab, the engineering bay, when they were rescuing Everoa. Topher looks at this and says, you know, it's very impressive, even in its damaged form, and it's absolutely Age of Arcanum tech. Keyleth asks, do you know where Ludinus is? And they say, we think that he's in Aor getting more machinery like this. Keyleth says, well, we actually know someone who's familiar with Isocross, but they're on an important mission, but they are sending an archivist to us who has researched the ruins before. And Keyleth basically gives them their next mission and says, your job is to go with this person and basically go to Isocross, stop Ludinus, or at least destroy what he's after, whether it's this tech or something else. Then we get this awesome, now hold on a second, from Chetney, because I think it's either Topher, I think it's actually maybe Mythtaker Key, who's like, yeah, y'all should be able to handle that even though you're total idiots, is kind of how it's said. And Chetney basically gives this amazing like short monologue on like, hey, we're the decision makers. Like we're the ones who've been to Ruidus. We've actually paid in blood and metal with losing FCG. Like we're the ones, like we deserve respect rather than like this, oh yeah, you guys, good luck, you know, go stop Ludinus, by the way. But Topher actually has a response to that, which is like, you don't know what we've seen. You don't know about, and then mentions this ancient evil by the name Kaford, I think, that has basically like totally obliterated a town, killed women and children indiscriminately. And that, you know, like Keyleth mentioned earlier, there's just absolute chaos that is deeply affecting people all over Exandria. But Keyleth's like, hey, Chetney's right, though. They deserve our respect. It's around this time that this archivist from the Cobalt Soul arrives, and this is Seth Domade, who's here on behalf of Caleb Wittagast. He's in his mid-40s, wearing glasses. He seems, every time he speaks, he seems to like mess with his glasses. And the cast is like absolutely losing it. Twitch chat is absolutely losing it. And here I am not having seen Campaign 2, who's like, this is great, right? What's happening? I don't know.
Listen, not Twitch chat, our Discord. Oh, I'm sure Twitch chat was as well.
Yeah, screw Twitch chat, you know?
Yeah. Come hang out in the Discord with us instead.
You can know over the next 10 minutes, there's going to be all sorts of like little comments and like fun little notes from the cast members. I'm not going to repeat it because I didn't understand any of it. But anyway, Seth Domade basically says that he has been to the ruins of Aor. It is now controlled by the Cerberus Assembly. The Cerberus Assembly has long abandoned the Dwendalian Empire, and that many of its key members have actually withdrawn. But of the 8 members, the eight archmages of the assembly, there is one member available for interrogation, but they're in hiding, and Seth says they know where to find them. But they can't talk about it here because it's just, there's too much at risk. So they're like, hey, if we're going to go get this archmage, like, we need to go now. The party does a couple of things. First, they ask the people of the war tent, like, hey, can you give us any stuff? And Topher's like, yeah, we can give you some gold. How much? And Chetney's like, 10,000 gold. And they're like, okay. And then I think it's like Laura Bailey's like, should we have asked for more? Because like they just gave that to us. And then there's also a really funny moment where Keyleth looks at Fern and says, hey, you look very tired. And Fern's like, I'm good. And then again, the cast members are like, hey, you're exhausted at the 4th level. And then Fern's like, oh, yes, I am very tired. So Keyleth casts Greater Restoration and removes 2 of the exhaustion points off of Fern. They step out of the tent. Seth casts a spell and teleports them away, and they find themselves in Zadash in Wildmount. They're in the town. The buildings are damaged and the rooftops are burned, almost like the city's been under a recent attack or a siege of some kind. Seth basically tells them with the heavy Crownsguard presence to be very careful. Some of them cast invisibility and they begin sneaking through the town. They're being very careful along the way. And Imogen finally says, like, hey, are we heading to a fight? Like, what are we about to get into? And Seth basically says, like, hey, I'm going to need you to help me capture this person. When you hear the code word, do not panic, grab them and hold them, do whatever you can. Eventually, they make their way to an early C2 amazing place that I do remember from my first 6 episodes, Chastity's Nook. This is a bookstore with some light reading of particular interests. They speak to the owner, Eva? I'm not sure her name.
Yeah.
There's the owner's like, what are you here for? And Imogen goes, we're here for the porn. And Eva names off some of the books they have, including the classic Tusk Love. And then they're like, well, if you need some more help, Irma in the back can probably help you find what you're looking for. So they go to the back room. They see this young woman this half-elf woman in her 20s who's sitting on a stool reading. She looks up and says, like, yeah, can I help you? Seth has this really tense moment of reaching back and shutting the door behind them and latching it shut, and then says, Bryn sends his regards. And there's an immediate heavy tension in the room. And then Seth says, please do not panic, which is the code word. Everyone springs into action. Chetney's going to cast Blood Curse of Binding, but it fails. Imogen casts Command with the word freeze, but it fails. Ashton's going to rage and try to push his mace up against this character and activate the immovable rod, and is successful as this character. Irma begins casting a 7th level teleport, which Laudna successfully counterspells. Dorian's going to cast 7th level Force Cage and just casually spends 1,500 gold in materials casting it. But Irma is going to counterspell that. Orem's going to glue her hand to the wall with Seedling's Grasping Vine. Imogen's going to cast Telekinesis to hold her body still and succeeds. And finally, Seth casts 8th level Anti-Magic Field, which drops all magical items to the ground, including dropping the illusion of this character, who is revealed to be a human woman in her 40s, burn marks across her neck, a scar on her face. This is Astrid Beck, to which Seth, by the way, who is no longer Seth and is actually Essek Thalos. And Essek says, yes, this is Astrid Beck, successor to Trent Ickathon, an archmage of the Cerberus Assembly. And Astrid responds, I am not his successor, I am his usurper. Essek says, it's time for a chat. And that is where our episode ends, episode 94, where the red fern glows. And if you're watching just the recap, make sure you click the link so you can see our full thoughts on the episode. And we want to hear your thoughts as well, so you can dive into the comment section over there.